Autumn 1944 swept cold rain across the shattered fields from Normandy to the German frontier. Thousands of German soldiers, weapons taken and hands bound with salvaged twine, shuffled into American wire enclosures under watchful guards. Their quartermasters pushed forward small tan cartons no larger than a handspan. Each box carried one word in bold letters: breakfast, or dinner, or supper. A sergeant sliced open a crate and tossed 3 boxes to every prisoner. 3 boxes for one day, 3 boxes that together weighed less than 4 pounds, yet promised an entire day's sustenance sealed against mud and frost. The first men to tear the waxed liners found flat cans of chopped ham and eggs, 4 hard biscuits, dense fruit bars, paper envelopes of instant coffee, packets of real sugar, strips of chewing gum, cigarettes, and folders of matches. The second boxes offered processed cheese in more cans, more biscuits, lemon powder, hard candy, and more cigarettes. The third held pork luncheon, meat bouillon cubes, thick chocolate bars, and the last of the tobacco. One day's food now lay before them in 3 identical packages. Roughly 2,800 kilocalories rested in 3 waterproof cartons that had ridden across the Atlantic, survived beach landings, and reached the front as emergency reserve. In the field, they had often lived on roughly 700 grams of black bread a day when trains ran at all. Ersatz coffee tasted of burnt acorns. Soup arrived thin and cold if it arrived at all. Divisions frayed into foraging parties because supply columns burned for lack of fuel on roads cratered by bombers. Now they held real meat sealed in tin, real sugar in white packets, tobacco that did not crumble to dust. One American match struck. The flame caught clean and steady. Coffee granules dissolved, dark and fragrant in canteen cups, warmed over those small fires. Across the enclosure, other prisoners opened their boxes in the same stunned silence. Chocolate disappeared first. Cigarettes passed from hand to hand. Empty cartons began to pile beside the wire until they formed uneven walls of cardboard around the pens. Looking at the growing stacks, men drew the same conclusion and passed it quietly from group to group. The Americans were feeding prisoners, at least as well as Germany now fed many of its own combat troops. That judgment carried farther than shouted orders. It travelled from cage to cage faster than any intelligence summary reached headquarters. One standardized daily ration of around 2,800 kilocalories, delivered in 3 pocket-sized boxes, stripped away the last pretense. German soldiers had been told that Americans were soft, that their industry served luxury while soldiers lived on borrowed time. Now, each captive held proof in his hands. If this was contingency food carried by ordinary riflemen against the day their kitchens fell behind, then the daily hot meals rolling forward in trucks must come from a pipeline of staggering depth. Men who had believed victory still lay weeks away, looked at the discarded cartons, and understood that the war had already turned somewhere far behind the front, in factories and ports and endless convoys they could never reach. The small cardboard box, designed only to keep one soldier fighting for one more day, revealed the true measure of endurance. 1942 found American laboratories testing small ration boxes by dropping them from warehouse platforms onto concrete floors. Cartons struck and bounced without splitting. Waxed liners kept out water after long soaks and stood up to heat and cold. Every edge was sealed to resist crushing when crates were stacked high in ship holds. Contracts followed within months. Food plants retooled entire floors to turn out millions of breakfast units and millions of dinner and supper units every month as the war expanded. One company baked hard biscuits that would not crumble in a pack, another canned chopped ham and eggs to an exact weight. Chocolate makers poured bars thick enough to survive pockets in summer. Every supplier followed the same blueprint, so a breakfast box opened in France matched one issued in the Pacific within a few grams. Quartermasters designed wooden shipping crates around the small cartons. Each crate held a fixed number of daily rations, with almost no wasted space, the cartons packed in tight rows, so that counting and loading took only seconds. Dozens of such crates filled a single truck bed. Hundreds filled a rail car. A Liberty ship loaded deep in holds with nothing but these crates could feed tens of thousands of soldiers for many days in a volume that once carried bulkier group rations. From the ports, the crates rolled inland on trains to the Channel coast. There, 2.5-ton trucks took over. Drivers on priority highways pushed north and east day and night. In September 1944, The express routes alone moved roughly 12,500 tons of supplies every 24 hours across France. Ration crates rode beside fuel drums and artillery shells because all three shared the same urgent priority. Combat units drew K-Rations when field kitchens fell behind the advance. Armoured columns that outpaced their cooks lived from the small boxes for days at a time. Paratroopers jumped with several days sealed in musette bags and leg bags. Engineers assaulting concrete forts kept supper units inside shirt pockets while handling charges. German staff studies already assumed that each American division required hundreds of tons of supplies every day. Prisoners now touched the proof. Those hundreds of tons included complete individual emergency meals that still contained meat and sugar and tobacco after crossing oceans and surviving every transfer. A soldier crouched beside a discarded crate could see the real constraint. American trucks simply detoured around craters and kept moving. German columns died where the last liter of fuel burned. The pipeline behind the K-ration never paused. November 1944 turned the enclosures behind the invasion beaches into small cities of captured men. New prisoners arrived in long columns week after week. Medical teams weighed many of them at the gate and recorded bodies worn down by months of short rations and hard marching. American food issue began the moment the wire closed. Cigarettes appeared before noon. The smell of real coffee drifted across the compound for the first time in years. Men who had almost forgotten sugar stirred spoonfuls into dented cups. Canned ham vanished between cracked lips in seconds. Chocolate bars disappeared into tunic linings against a hunger that had become a constant companion. Interrogators watched the change settle within hours. Men who arrived silent or defiant began to talk once stomachs filled. Reports from camps repeated the same pattern. American soldiers complained that the K-ration tasted dull and monotonous, yet carried it only as emergency food, while they ate hot meals whenever kitchens and transport allowed. In one compound, officers and enlisted men opened supper units under lantern light. The chocolate bars still carried factory gloss. Wrappers showed dates from only a few months earlier, and plants thousands of miles away. The boxes had been manufactured, shipped, railed, and trucked forward, then handed out as contingency rather than as the main meal of the day. The conclusion spread quietly from group to group. Such rations were being produced by the millions and still counted as reserve. Standardized packing reinforced the point. K-rations were loaded in wooden crates built around the dimensions of the small cartons, stacked tight with little wasted space, easy to count and easy to move. Those crates had crossed the Atlantic in liberty. Ships rolled off in ports, travelled inland on trains, and finally ridden north and east on 2.5-ton trucks along priority routes that carried thousands of tons of supplies every 24 hours. In the camps, weight gain became visible proof. German prisoners who had gone hungry at the front began to put on kilos once they received regular meals that included meat, bread, and sufficient calories. At the same time, letters and rumours from home spoke of civilians facing sharp cuts in official rations as the war ground on. Men who once believed the Americans would exhaust themselves against fortified lines now measured the distance between one small carton and total defeat. The daily K-ration weighed under 3 pounds yet carried complete sustenance for 24 hours. The Wehrmacht fielded nothing comparable that a soldier could slip into a pocket and still be sure of eating for an entire day. Each box in a prisoner's hands pointed back to a supply system that reached from factory to foxhole without breaking. Every item inside the small carton pointed to the same excess capacity. Cigarettes arrived in small packets, folded into each meal, rolled in factories that did not shut for lack of leaf. Meat plants canned entire runs, once destined for civilian tables now sealed for soldiers alone. Sugar refineries processed cane from fields untouched by war, while convoys brought more across oceans that grew safer each month. Standardization ruled without mercy. Every breakfast unit held a measured envelope of soluble coffee, 2 envelopes of sugar, and a few cigarettes of identical blend. A carton opened beside the Rhine contained components interchangeable with one opened beside the Po. Plants could burn and production simply shifted west without changing the contents that reached the front. German supply officers, by contrast, issued whatever survived the bombing. One week acorn coffee, the next week no bread at all. Regiments frayed into scattered bands because no convoy reached them. American divisions pushed hundreds of miles in a matter of weeks and still drew regular ration issues because the chain bent but did not break. Express trucks carried roughly 12,500 tons of supplies each day at the peak of the priority routes in September. When one road closed, another opened through newly working ports and repaired railheads. Depots tried to hold weeks of reserve stocks while still pushing hundreds of tons forward each day to the armies and divisions fighting at the front. Prisoners traced the path backward from their own hands. If captors fed enemies from the same crates that supplied pursuing armies, the reserve stockpile stood beyond reach or calculation. Standard wooden crates held fixed numbers of daily rations packed tight with little wasted space easy to stack in a ship's hold or on a truck. The German army had never designed such a crate because it had never possessed uniform contents to fill it. A lancer turned the empty cartons slowly in the firelight. Waxed seams perfect, printing crisp. Weight light enough for one man to carry several days' food without feeling burdened. The box itself was engineering applied to hunger. Germany had mastered steel and concrete. The United States had mastered the last mile between factory and stomach. German doctrine once praised frugality as strength. Short wars would end before supply decided victory. By the winter of 1944, the sixth year dragged on against enemies who grew stronger the farther they advanced from home ports. Captured officers spoke of rations without prompting. Some described armoured units halted not only by enemy fire, but by crews weakened after months of reduced bread issues and thin soups. By contrast, they learned that American crews could fall back on complete K-ration meals when advances outran their kitchens, and still expect hot food when field ranges caught up. The small carton became shorthand for the entire imbalance. American soldiers disliked the monotony, yet carried the boxes only as reserve. German soldiers had nothing comparable even as primary issue. Senior officers who once mocked American resolve now recalculated in silence. A division able to place complete daily nutrition in every pocket, then feed those same men better when trucks rolled forward would not break from hunger or exhaustion. In evening discussions behind wire, the same conclusion formed. The war, some said, had effectively ended the moment the first K-ration reached German hands. Empty stomachs performed the arithmetic no staff map could refute. Roughly 2,800 kilocalories, sealed in 3 boxes that together weighed under 3 pounds, could reach any point a truck could drive. German soldiers measured that distance and found it effectively without limit. Men who expected collapse across the Rhine looked instead at discarded wrappers and understood the front had already moved behind them into factories they could never bomb and fields they could never occupy. The cardboard box carried more than food. It carried final proof that endurance had chosen its victor long before the first shot of autumn. American studies after the war criticized the K-ration for nutritional shortcomings when it was used longer than the short periods for which it had been designed. By 1948, the Army had declared it obsolete, and newer rations with better balance replaced the small cartons in regular service. Veterans on both sides remembered differently. American soldiers spoke of the boxes that kept them moving when kitchens lagged far behind the spearheads. They disliked the taste, yet trusted the promise sealed inside. German accounts used quieter language. Memoirs described the moment a prisoner opened the first American ration as the instant certainty arrived. The waxed carton joined white bread and real coffee as objects that ended debate. No propaganda could survive the evidence held in one hand. Officers' courses later used photographs of discarded American ration boxes lying beside torn German paybooks on frozen ground to illustrate what material superiority looked like at the level of one soldier. The images needed few words. Advantage in resources made visible around one man. Logisticians recorded permanent lessons. Design packaging so the last tactical mile receives the same quality as the factory door. Build rations that industry can produce and push forward in great quantities without special runs. Protect the trucks above all, because rails fail under air attack, and hunger begins the moment wheels stop. The carton itself was small enough to slip into a field jacket pocket, yet powerful enough to change more minds than a division in line of battle. One emergency ration containing meat and sugar and coffee and tobacco for one man for one day, produced by the millions and delivered to every major theatre, ended resistance long before surrender forms were signed. The small box proved that modern war is won in canneries and depots, and endless convoys long before soldiers meet. Hunger, once felt and then relieved by enemy hands, became the quiet messenger that told German soldiers the true front had already been lost far behind them in places they would never see. December 1944 brought the first hard frost to the prisoner cages along the Moselle. A young grenadier from a shattered Volksgrenadier division sat on an ammunition box and turned the empty supper carton in his gloved hands. The waxed cardboard still carried warmth from his pocket. He read the small printed letters again, though he already knew them by heart. Supper unit. Packed for the United States Army in Chicago, Illinois. He had eaten the pork loaf in 4 bites, the chocolate bar in 2, the 4 cigarettes he saved for morning. Nothing remained except the box itself and the faint smell of cocoa on his fingers. Around him, other men slept under issue blankets or stared at the same empty cartons. No one spoke of escape. No one spoke of the Ardennes offensive beginning far to the north. Words felt unnecessary now. 3 weeks earlier, this same grenadier had shared 1 loaf of bread among 6 men for 24 hours. He had boiled acorn coffee over a fire made from chair legs. He had marched until boots wore through, and hunger became a constant, dull ache behind the eyes. Tonight he felt full, not stuffed, the K-ration never allowed that, but full in the way only men who have known real emptiness recognize. The small box had done its limited job perfectly. It had kept him alive and thinking for 1 more day. He placed the empty carton on the ground and pressed it flat with his heel. The cardboard resisted, then folded with a soft snap. In that small sound, he heard the entire war settle into final shape. Somewhere beyond the wire, American trucks still rolled forward, carrying crates filled with cartons, exactly like the one that had fed him. Standard wooden boxes stacked by the thousands in depots, and ship holds held fixed numbers of daily rations, ready to move wherever roads remained open. Each crate meant more days of fighting left in American pockets before any soldier felt true hunger. He looked toward the dark tree line, where searchlights swept slowly back and forth. The lights found nothing to stop. The pipeline stretched west to ports that still worked under blackout, and east to divisions that advanced without having to pause for empty stomachs. The grenadier pulled the blanket higher and closed his eyes. Tomorrow would bring another 3 boxes if the quartermasters followed routine. Tomorrow would bring more proof that resistance had become mathematics. The small, flattened carton lay in the frost beside his boot. It weighed almost nothing now, yet it had carried the decisive message farther than any shell or bomb. The side that could feed its prisoners from the same emergency reserve that fed its own troops held the real advantage. He slept without dreams. Hunger, once his constant companion, had changed sides. For the first time in months, it no longer decided how far he could march or how clearly he could think.